Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's topic on report writing. This time we'll be reviewing some things you should be fairly familiar with, and first of all is writing a paragraph, except this time we'll be framing that in writing a paragraph for your reports. So the rules for writing paragraphs for reports doesn't differ very much from that of writing paragraphs for essays. You still need a key point for each paragraph, which you will then need to build upon in order to construct the entire paragraph later on. But let's just remind ourselves of what a paragraph is composed of. So first of all, it's basically a group of sentences about a single topic. So a main key idea, one idea per paragraph, and then of course these sentences explain the writer's main idea, which you mention in the topic sentence. Usually paragraphs about 5 to 10 sentences long. This really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So especially for reports, this isn't necessarily true. You could have a very short paragraph as you're trying to be as precise as possible. So this key point that we mentioned just now is framed within that topic sentence. Now, topic sentence is traditionally the very first sentence of a paragraph, and this is generally encouraged. And why this is so that the reader can easily predict and know what the rest of the paragraph will be talking about. So let's go through the structure of a paragraph really quickly. So you have the topic sentence, which is the main idea and the first sentence of the paragraph, followed by supporting sentences, which of course help to, other than support the topic sentence, it helps to explain and elaborate a little bit more about the key idea that you mentioned in the first topic sentence. And then finally you have a concluding sentence, which is predictably the last sentence of the paragraph. However, in reports, it's not always necessary to have a concluding sentence, as you will have paragraphs which are quite short and which don't require a concluding sentence. And we'll cover this a little bit more in a few slides later on. But again, just to remind ourselves of what constitutes a topic sentence, other than being the most important sentence in the paragraph, it basically lets the reader know what the paragraph is going to be talking about. Now, this seems like an obvious thing, but do make sure that your topic sentence actually is a complete sentence, especially in reports where you may have bullet points which are not necessarily complete sentences. Just try to ensure that your topic sentences actually are complete sentences in themselves. So a topic sentence is made up of what they call a topic and a controlling idea, which we'll cover in the next slide, and is also known to be the most general statement in the paragraph. So basically the takeaway here is it's the most important sentence. It basically illustrates what that paragraph is going to be talking about, should be complete, and is also the most general statement in that paragraph. So what we mean by topic and controlling idea, so as you can see from the example at the top there, convenience foods are easy to prepare. The topic or the key term or phrase of this topic sentence is convenience foods. So that's the general point or general topic of the sentence. But the controlling idea, easy to prepare, basically gives the reader the exact point that you are going to elaborate on within that one paragraph. So you have the general idea, and then you have the controlling or defining idea. And that is what constitutes an effective topic sentence, because it gives the reader a precise idea of what the paragraph is going to be talking about. Now, supporting sentences, they obviously support the topic sentence, and it gives your reader a more detailed picture of what you mentioned very briefly in your topic sentence. So some common ways of supporting your topic sentence is by providing an explanation for one, and you can break this down into another further 2 subtopics where you can explain by providing more information about the key idea that you mentioned in your topic sentence. Or you can explain by giving a more detailed definition. So perhaps you gave a particular key term in your topic sentence as the main point or main idea, and you can define it a little bit more within your supporting details. So that's one way of providing support for your topic sentence. Another way is by giving an illustration, and we can also further divide this into another 2. So you can illustrate your topic sentence or key idea by citing research that you've done, so the studies or the literature review that you've conducted for this particular report or for this particular research. You could mention these people's ideas, and that will help to illustrate or to help to support your key point. Another way to illustrate your key point is by giving examples to give your reader a better picture of whatever idea you're trying to convey. Now have a look at the following paragraph in the next slide and see if you can identify the role of each of the sentences. So how can you label each sentence? Is it an explanation or an illustration? So this paragraph is in the first handout from the blog. Fill in the blanks and bring your handout to class for discussion amongst your classmates. Now the concluding sentence. So normally for academic essays, the concluding sentence, it basically gives a reader the idea that they have reached the end of the paragraph, and also it helps to summarize the main points of that paragraph to sort of remind them what that paragraph was about. But in reports, concluding sentences aren't always necessary. So they're usually only written for the last parts of the report, which is namely the discussion, conclusion, and recommendations sections. So keep this in mind. A concluding sentence is good. It helps to make your writing a bit clearer, but only for certain sections. So for these certain sections that you do want to provide a concluding sentence, try and include an end of paragraph signal such as finally, in brief, in conclusion, and so on. So these signals require a comma after the transition word. But another way that you could signal the end of the paragraph is by using these signals, which are not followed by a comma, such as the evidence suggests that, there can be no doubt that, these examples show that, and so on. So it's up to you what signals you want to use, but basically they're supposed to give the reader the idea that you are going to rephrase the paragraph in another way, and that's how you're going to end that particular paragraph. Now here's a task for you. Read the following paragraph on the next slide and try to identify, first of all, the main idea. Secondly, what factual information is being reported? Is it in the form of an explanation or an illustration? And finally, what is the concluding point? So this particular paragraph does have a concluding sentence, and it is in the form of an outcome. So what is the outcome or concluding point of this paragraph? So this paragraph will also be in your handout. Have a read through, identifies those 3 parts, and then bring it to your next class. So to review paragraph structure, they're basically structure unit of essays and other academic assignments such as your report, a short piece of writing, make sure that all the sentences are related and that you're building it on one particular key point, which is usually in the first sentence of this paragraph. And so you have to make sure the content of the paragraph, the supporting points, and perhaps the concluding statements are all just developments from the general statement, from the topic sentence, the first sentence of that paragraph. So it depends on the length. There's no really set rule on how long the paragraph is, as long as you get your message across. But it is definitely an important skill to have, as it provides a sound foundation for all of your academic writing. So make sure you have the appropriate components of an academic paragraph, whether that's for essays or for reports. So again, a paragraph is made of mainly the main idea, which is the very first sentence, so your key point or issue in that first sentence of the paragraph, which may be followed by a supporting point that you could frame in the form of an explanation by clarifying whatever that point is that you mentioned in the first sentence. Or you could provide a supporting sentence in the form of an illustration where you can give examples of your main point, or you can cite research that you came across in your literature review to help also support your main point. So some further tips on the paragraph structure, but this time more in terms of the content that you need to cover in particular sections in the report. So first of all, the introduction. So these are the things that you need to include. So the context of the report, what is the general subject matter? So you have to, these top 2 points basically give the reader a bit of background of the particular subject that you are covering in this report. And of course, thirdly, you need to describe the problems. So in your case, the report question that you're provided by your lecturers or your tutors. And then fourthly, define the objectives. What are the aims of your report? What are you trying to achieve or discover? And then outline the scope of your report. So how far, what is the range of the report or study that you are conducting? The next point, you may want to provide a preview of your report structure if you would like to. And then finally, you need to give some indication of the limitations of the study that you actually conducted. So these are the parts that you need to include in your introduction. So next you've got the conclusion. So here is basically where you summarize the main findings or results that you came across in your study. So that's fairly obvious. But secondly, you need to remember to relate whatever is mentioned in your conclusion to the objectives that you talked about in your introduction as well. So there needs to be a clear link between the first part of your report to the final part of your report. Thirdly, of course, it should follow logically from the discussion, so no random points out of nowhere. It needs to be linked fairly strongly to your discussion section. So of course there's no new material that should be mentioned in the conclusion. You're pretty much just restating what you talked about in your discussion section. And then finally, you need to mention your major conclusions first, as well as identify any of the major issues that you came across. So the recommendation section is where you focus on the future. So what are the suggestions that you have for this particular problem or your particular study that you think would be beneficial? And of course it would be something that you imagine in the future. And so it's unique part where you can actually provide your subjective opinion. But of course, this needs to be linked to your study. Is it feasible in terms of maybe cost, location, practicality? Was it acceptable in the particular culture or country or situation that you're putting it in? Make sure it's logically following from the discussion and it's related to your discussions and conclusions. So yes, provide your opinion, but make sure that it's an informed opinion, informed by the study that you conducted. And finally, also make sure that it's to the point. So ensure that it's written in a language that's easy to understand and that your reader can easily follow. And then we have the discussion section. This is where you fully explain the conclusions. So as we mentioned before, the conclusion is basically a restatement of what you covered in the main part of your report. So you have to ensure that your discussion helps to provide all the necessary details to fully elaborate on whatever conclusions you come up with in the end. And of course, related to this, it has to also justify the recommendations that you provided. So you can't just recommend something which isn't related to anything in your report. It has to logically follow, as we mentioned previously, from whatever you mentioned before that. So discussion section is where you provide all this justification for the recommendations you mentioned later on. And how do you justify it? You need to provide evidence and examples. And of course, also link theory to practice, meaning link whatever you came across in your literature review to your practical suggestions or recommendations. And that brings us to the end of paragraph structure for report writing. So I suggest you take a break before we move on to the next component of this week's lecture. See you in a bit.